The after-hours floor of Helix Biodine was never silent, even at 10:47 p.m. centrifuges drummed in distant labs, and the refrigeration alarms chirped their timed reassurance. Evangeline Pike moved through that artificial twilight like someone trespassing in a cathedral, bare feet tucked into laboratory clogs, eyes gritty from 15 hours of tabulating adverse event data. One more spreadsheet, she told herself, then the pediatric funding proposal would finally balance, and she could go home to her studio above the coin laundry before sunrise reset the world. She had just hit recalculate for the 30th time when the elevator at the end of the glass corridor opened with a hush usually reserved for ICU doors. Out stepped Lysander Moore, founder, chief synthetic biology architect, notorious recluse. He wore a charcoal raincoat that looked too thin for the sleet-rattling midtown, and he carried no security escort, only a folded newspaper and the expression of someone who's anticipated an explosion and come to watch the smoke. Evangeline rose automatically, smoothing the coffee-splotched hem of her blouse. "Mr. Moore, the volunteer cohort variant still spikes at week 8, but I can normalize though." He didn't seem to hear. Crossing to her desk, he laid the newspaper flat so the headline blared up between them in red serif type. Genius CEO's Moonlight Rendezvous with Subordinate, Merger in Bed. The grainy telephoto beneath showed the Helix parking structure, Lysander, profile stark under sodium lights, reaching to accept a file folder from a woman whose face was blocked by the folder's tab, yet the wild sweep of strawberry blonde hair was unmistakable. Evangeline remembered the moment with awful clarity. She had chased him down 15 minutes before midnight to hand-deliver the Phase 3 safety addendum he needed for the FDA breakfast call. A coworker had joked that if paparazzi ever staked out a biotech facility they'd die of boredom. Apparently boredom wasn't lethal after all. "The board meets at 7 a.m., Lysander said at last. His voice carried a measured cadence, as though every sentence had been drafted, peer-reviewed, and only then released. "They're already fielding calls from regulators wondering whether human resource violations could jeopardize our vaccine dossier." She stared at the ink bleeding slightly into the newsprint fibers. But nothing happened. "They don't need it to have happened." He tapped the headline. "They need a counternarrative before market opens." A sick heat flooded her chest, anger, fear, something in between. "Fire me, then. Issue a statement that I was an overzealous biostatistician acting alone. Dismissal suggests guilt. The press will sharpen the pitchforks, investors will assume cover-up, and the FDA will slow-walk every protocol you and I care about." He inhaled, exhaled, glanced past her to the conference table where empty coffee cups formed a graveyard. "There is another solution." The word solution, coming from Lysander Moore, usually meant algorithms no one else could code or patent claims fattening in a vault. Now it landed like ice water down the spine. "What solution?" "We present a respectable, albeit sudden, engagement." His gaze flicked back to her, assessing statistical probability in the arch of her eyebrows. "Followed by a private civil ceremony. Short term. 6 months, enough for news cycles to pivot and for our B-cell modulator trial to finish unimpeded." A laugh, brittle, escaped her. "You're suggesting we get married to improve your stock price." "To protect the science," he corrected, too softly for arrogance. "And your own project. You're chasing a therapy that could spare children lifelong immunosuppression. If the funding collapses with the IPO, that data dies in a drawer." Evangeline folded her arms to hide the tremor. Outside the window, 20 stories down, Broadway traffic droned like blood through an artery. "You hate press. Why invite more?" "Because, paradoxically, the press respects vows. Even hasty ones." He paused. "The legal team has drafted a contract. Separate rooms at my Hudson property, public appearances limited to quarterly earnings and one charity gala. At the end of the term, a mutual dissolution clause, no penalties, no gag orders. You keep full principal investigator credit and an unrestricted grant to Oklahoma Children's." Her pulse pounded in her ears, drowning out centrifuge thrums. Marriage had never ranked on her life's to-do list. She'd grown up watching a mother count pharmacy receipts while a father vanished for months at pipeline jobs. But the column of figures on her laptop, cost of antigen A, transport of sub-zero reagents, the red negative before the subtotal, burned behind her eyes. "I haven't even been on a date in 2 years, she whispered. "Neither have I," he answered, as if confession leveled the field. "The public won't care. They care about narrative arcs, lapse, redemption, merger sealed by holy paperwork." She surprised herself by leaning back against the desk and studying him without flinching. Under the tired neon his face looked less like the magazine caricatures, monkish prodigy, market shark, and more like a man who hadn't slept since the genome printing breakthrough 5 winters ago. A faint freckle sat beside his left eye, a humanizing pixel editors always airbrushed away. "If I refuse? Then I walk into that boardroom alone and fight. Odds are 50-50 we lose the bridge financing, and your trial freezes by November." He offered no theatrics, only a bleak ledger of probabilities. The printer in the hallway clattered to life, spitting out the very contract he'd referenced, 22 crisp pages sliding into the output tray. Somewhere a cleaning robot navigated, humming to itself like a lullaby for the sleepless. Evangeline pictured the children whose serum samples already lined liquid nitrogen racks. She pictured her own future, one more anonymous scientist applying for ever-shrinking grants while headlines devoured progress. 6 months, she said, surprised at the steadiness of her tone. "No onward obligations." "Exactly 6, he agreed. "And my name stays first author on every manuscript." It never left. She straightened, wiped palms on her lab coat, and stuck out her hand. "Then, Mr. Moore, congratulations on your ill-considered engagement." For a heartbeat he hesitated, as though unsure whether handshakes belonged in proposals of marriage. Then his fingers closed around hers, warm and dry and calloused at the joints from years of bench work no PR shot ever captured. The elevator chimed again, summoning them to the 28th floor where legal portraits and witness signatures waited. As the doors slid shut behind them, Evangeline caught their reflection in the mirrored panel, 2 exhausted scientists backlit by fluorescent aftermath, marching toward a ceremony composed entirely of ink and necessity. Somewhere in that reflection a headline had already begun to rewrite itself, but she couldn't read the ending yet, only the improbable first line. "In the pursuit of data, they signed their hearts on the dotted line." The sun hadn't breached the skyline when Evangeline and Lysander emerged from the 28th floor conference room, fresh signatures drying on linen paper that now bore the weight of 6 legally binding months. Outside, midtown streets were rinsed in sodium glow, but inside Helix Biodine a different glow spread, emails detonating across vice president inboxes, calendar invites snapping into place. By 6:30 a.m. the communications director had drafted the official statement. Helix Biodine is pleased to announce the private union of its founder, Dr. Lysander Moore, and senior biostatistician Dr. Evangeline Pike. The couple requests privacy as they continue their shared mission of advancing pediatric immunology. That last line had been Evangeline's single demand. If she had to play fiancé, the children in her trial would, at minimum, ride the headline with her. The board meeting that followed felt like a live autopsy, 12 directors parsing tissue for signs of rot. Lysander opened with a crisp recitation of regulatory timelines, pivoted to market resilience statistics, and closed by introducing Evangeline not as scandal but as collaborator. Her work lowered our projected adverse event rate by 18%. I trust her analysis more than I trust this company's share price. When he ceded the floor, Evangeline fielded 3 questions about trial methodology and 1 thinly veiled inquiry about conception plans. She smiled, quoted WHO data on maternal stress and vaccine efficacy, and watched the director scribble notes, suitably chastened. By adjournment, the emergency threat meter had cooled from crimson to amber. The CFO muttered to an assistant that at least a wedding was cheaper than a buyout. At 10 sharp a town car idled at the curb to ferry them north to Lysander's Hudson estate, 3 acres of former monastery land partitioned by stone walls and wild ferns. The ride passed in near silence, punctuated by her sporadic typing as she answered frantic texts from her lab team. Lysander, shoulders pressed flat to the leather headrest, seemed wired into some internal dashboard only he could read. When traffic stalled near the George Washington Bridge, he finally spoke. The contract mentions separate living quarters, he said, eyes on a flock of starlings twisting above the river. I designated the West Wing guest suite for you. Key cards are programmable to whatever security level you choose. I appreciate the privacy, she answered, and almost added, even though nothing about this is private. Instead she asked if there was lab space on the property. She would need a clean bench for interim analyses. He nodded, pointing to a converted carriage house visible down a slope of sugar maples, negative pressure hoods, -80 freezer, satellite uplink. Stocked but underused. They arrived to a hush broken only by wind chimes. The mansion itself, built of river stone and copper gutters turned sage green, presented fewer mansion clichés than she'd feared. No marble columns, no chandeliers, just heavy oak doors and the faint scent of cedar smoke escaping a chimney. A single employee, a gray-bearded caretaker named Lowell, met them with 2 large umbrellas and an expression of mild curiosity that never tipped into prying. He accepted her duffel, ignored the tabloids burning through his phone on silent, and guided her to a room that overlooked the river like a watercolor washed in real time. Boxes from her apartment, mysteriously, efficiently, had already arrived, labeled in Lysander's angular handwriting. She found her well-worn statistical text stacked beside a bay window, her thrift shop mug inside a polished maple cabinet clearly too fine for coffee rings. On the dresser lay a slim envelope. Inside, a metal access card engraved with stylized owl wings, the symbol of her clinical project. Beneath it, one sticky note, grant funds transferred. Reagent orders unblocked. No signature, just the certainty that he wanted the gesture to announce itself without ceremony. She unpacked until noon, then ventured to find the kitchen. Lysander stood barefoot on slate tiles, sleeves rolled, mincing ginger with the crisp precision of someone who had once dissected zebrafish embryos. A shallow cast-iron pan hissed while scallions wilted. 2 bowls were already set at a rustic farm table. I don't cook, she warned, hovering near the doorway. I do. Or I try, no staff until dinner. He slid a bowl toward her, brown rice, sesame-scorched broccoli, a soft-boiled egg split like sunrise. She realized she'd eaten only vending machine peanuts since the newspaper headline. The first bite flooded her limbs with warmth that felt suspiciously like gratitude. They ate mostly in silence, interrupted by Lowell delivering their phones newly configured with a joint calendar, the public events they must attend together, a biotech charity gala in 3 weeks, an ARPA health panel in Boston, one holiday season fundraiser for an orphan drug coalition. Evangeline scrolled the itinerary, pulse skittering at the thought of gowns and smiles and eyes trained to detect cracks. Lysander must have noticed, he said, you set the boundary lines. Press interaction, social media, even wardrobe. I'll follow your lead. You, following someone's lead? She tried to sound teasing, not accusatory. I follow data, he corrected, washing the cutting board. And you're closer to the trial data than anyone. He paused, considering the soap bubbles, then added, I'll need your measurements for a tailor, the gala requires black tie. No cameras allowed in fittings, you have my word. The afternoon drifted into separate orbits. She tested the carriage house lab, equipment pristine, freezer inventory logged to the milliliter. Later she phoned her younger sister in Tulsa, fumbling for an explanation that wasn't technically a lie but spared family panic. She settled on, I'm in a collaboration that moved fast, it's complicated, but the research is safe. The sister, a nurse accustomed to ICU chaos, merely said, call if you need a sanity check, and left it at that. After dusk Evangeline wandered the East Wing and discovered an octagonal library smelling of dust and bergamot. No glossy business magazines here, only first editions of Turing, Rosalind Franklin, even a weathered field guide to Oklahoma wildflowers she suspected he'd sourced after reading her graduate thesis. On an antique lectern lay a folio of botanical lithographs annotated in a spidery hand. She sensed these rooms were rarely shared, stepping into them felt like trespassing on the quiet parts of his genome. She turned to find Lysander in the doorway, tie loosened, hair damp from the courtyard mist. "I keep forgetting the library still exists," he said. "My mother catalogued it. She believed every laboratory needed a sanctuary of unquantifiable things." Evangeline brushed fingertips across the flower plates. "My mother thought the same, though her sanctuary was a roadside diner with terrible coffee." He smiled, a small asymmetrical thing that shed a decade from his face. Sometimes terrible coffee is the perfect reagent. The moment stretched, not romantic, exactly, but suspended between fragile confidences. Then her phone vibrated, a push notification from a science blog already speculating wedding dates. She sighed, pocketed it unread. He cocked his head. "Are you regretting the deal?" "I'm regretting that humanity prefers fairy tales to protocols," she said, then grimaced at her own bitterness. "But I don't regret preserving the trial. That makes two of us." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the corridor. "Lowell leaves fresh tea in the sunroom around 9. If you can't sleep, the river is loud enough to drown headlines." She thanked him, retreated to her suite, and stood a while at the balcony rail. Darkness pooled over the Hudson, dotted by the red blink of barges. Somewhere behind a stand of pines a barred owl hooted, low and probing. For the first time since the photograph's flash caught her exchanging a folder in a parking lot, Evangeline felt the possibility that this marriage of necessity might hold room for something gentler than survival, perhaps even collaboration of the human sort. Inside, she opened her laptop to resume data cleaning, only to find an emailed calendar alert from Lysander. "Wednesday 6 o'clock, the first flowers of Viola nephrophila are due in the greenhouse. Statistical beauty break, mandatory attendance." She shook her head, half smiling, saved her spreadsheet, and set the alarm. On the nightstand, the access card with owl wings glinted in lamplight, promising funding, laboratories, and the unnerving proximity of a man who measured life in both base pairs and quiet gestures. The contract they had signed was clinical in language, surgical in scope. But chapters, she knew, were rarely contained by clauses, they unfolded in increments, coffee spoons, ginger slices, the hush of a library neither of them had entered for years until tonight. An alarm that sounded more like a distant wood thrush than a phone roused Evangeline at 5:45. She dressed by moon-gray lamplight, canvas trousers, an oversized sweatshirt that still smelled faintly of her old apartment, and padded down the corridor. The house was vast but not oppressive. Hall sconces glowed at a setting that seemed calibrated for night shift scientists roaming for coffee. She followed the faint hiss of the greenhouse vents until she reached a frosted glass door with a keypad already blinking green. Lysander waited inside, crouched over a waist-high tray of heart-shaped leaves. Between them, under a grow lamp tuned to dawn-soft peach, a single violet unfurled petals the color of carefully diluted hematoxylin. He didn't notice her until she spoke. "Statistical beauty break," she announced, making air quotes. "I see the patient is punctual." He looked up, face lit from below like a half-tamed gargoyle, and whispered, "Watch." As the lamp spectrum shifted toward full daylight, microscopic trichomes on the petals flashed iridescent, scattering light like sun on water. He pulled a pocket spectrophotometer, captured the scattering index, and turned the readout so she could see. 5 nanometers tighter bandwidth than the cultivated strain. Stress response, maybe. She knelt beside him, forgetting the contract, the press, the impending Gala fittings. He explained how Viola nephrophila thrived in nutrient-poor substrates, its pigments byproducts of unlikely survival. She considered the metaphor and said, "So even desperation has a measurable beauty curve." He smiled without argument. An hour later they parted for separate routines. Lysander disappeared into a teleconference with regulatory consultants, while she rode a golf cart down to the carriage house lab. The negative pressure hood still gleamed from Lowell's obsessive polishing, and her data server recognized her fingerprint on first scan. By noon she had pushed adverse event variance below 10%, a threshold that had eluded her for 3 weeks in the city. When she emailed Lysander a celebratory exclamation point, his reply came back 30 seconds later: "We should publish that confidence interval on our wedding cakes." The accidental plural jolted her until she realized he meant the charity gala's dessert menu. Helix always branded everything. Just after 2, a tailor convoy arrived, 3 women hauling garment bags longer than she was tall, plus a bespectacled man wielding chalk and silk measuring tape. Evangeline resigned herself to pins and posture. Lysander hovered only long enough to veto any gown that restricted shoulder motion. "She has to carry a pipette," he said, stone-faced, earning a scandalized gasp from the stylist. Evangeline stifled laughter behind a fist. Eventually, they settled on midnight blue silk with hidden pockets, a dress serious enough for keynote photos yet airy enough that she could breathe. While chalk lines marked the hem, her phone pinged with a news alert. An entertainment blog had discovered the wedding license filed overnight in Ossining and was running side-by-side photos, Lysander in his trademark black turtleneck, her in a lab coat and goggles. The headline read, "Beauty and the Petri Beast." She flinched. The stylist noticed and tightened pins too high on her ribs. Lysander stepped forward, took the phone without asking, scanned the article, and deleted the app. "Change your news filters," he said quietly. "You need signal, not noise." She found herself shaking once the Taylor caravan departed. Retreat seemed logical, but she walked instead to the riverside gazebo where Lysander sometimes dictated notes. He was there now, laptop shut, eyes on the steel-colored Hudson. "The headline?" he asked. "Not lethal," she answered, sitting on the step. "Just humbling." "I can pull our faces from their archives," he offered. "Legal leverage is trivial." But the next headline grows 2 more heads. She drew her knees to her chest. "We can't amputate the Hydra daily." He considered that, then said, "Hydras die when you starve them of attention." He reached into his coat, produced 2 paper coffee cups, hers labeled Trial Data Whisperer. She snorted despite herself. The coffee was strong and clove-scented, whatever roast it was, it eclipsed tabloids nicely. That evening Lowell lit fireplaces against early October chill. They ate roasted squash and farro in the kitchen nook while reviewing Gala briefing sheets. Each donor had a dossier: oncology CEO, venture philanthropist, a retired astronaut. Evangeline memorized talking points, Lysander doodled protein helices in the margins. "You don't have to impress them," he said when he caught her reciting receptor acronyms under her breath. "You already have what they want, proof of concept." "Yes, but they have what we need, follow-on funding." He conceded with a tilt of his chin, then added, "Remember the contract says you can tap out. I will shoulder any schmoozing overflow." "I'm keeping score," she joked, but warmth spread anyway. Near midnight a storm rolled off the Catskills. Wind lashed ivy against her window while spreadsheets glowed on her screen. She tried to sleep, failed, and wandered toward the library. Lysander was there, barefoot, playing Debussy on a mahogany upright she hadn't noticed before, soft minor chords that almost drowned the thunder. He paused when she stepped in. "Insomnia?" he asked. "Forecast for the next 6 months," she replied, leaning against a shelf. "I thought you hated cameras. Why build this spectacle?" He closed the piano lid with a sigh. "Because Helix grew beyond laboratory walls. Investors want origin stories they can bottle. A bachelor genius who never leaves the clean room is interesting for a while, then unnerving. A married genius? Much safer. And me?" She folded her arms. "Am I the safety?" "At first, yes. Now." He searched for a word, seemed to discard several. "Now you're the variable I can't model but refuse to lose." The thunder rolled closer, vibrating the glass. She felt the admission settle, neither romantic nor cold, just factual, like the violet spectral bandwidth. She crossed to the piano and pressed one key, a quiet A-flat. "Variables can skew both good and bad," she said. "True. So we test them. He stood, offering the bench. Play something. She sat, embarrassed. Her mother had taught her only hymns. Fingers hesitant, she began Amazing Grace. Lysander joined at the octave, finding harmonies that transformed the simple tune into something searching. Rain hammered the roof. When the last chord faded, she realized she had forgotten to worry about pageantry or paparazzi for an entire 4 minutes. It felt revolutionary. They said goodnight at the library door. He bowed, half mockery, half genuine courtesy, and she curtsied in return with exaggerated lab coat flair that made him laugh, low and startled. In her room she recorded a voice memo of the thunder for tomorrow's data entry session, white noise therapy for her team. Before sleep finally claimed her, she checked her calendar, fittings complete, Gala T-9 days. The interval felt perilous yet navigable, like the confidence interval she had conquered that afternoon. Outside, the river rushed dark and relentless, but inside, a different current had begun, slow, precise, mapping two trajectories that were no longer entirely independent. Morning fog clung to the Hudson like unspooled wool the day the past barged into Lysander's curated calm. Evangeline was in the carriage house lab, coaxing an obstinate statistical model into convergence, when the landline, an antique rotary Lowell insisted on keeping, rang with a jarring clatter. She let it pulse 3 times before lifting the receiver, expecting another Gala vendor. Instead, a clipped baritone asked for Dr. Moore, then added with measured politeness, "This is Marshall Kincaid, counsel to the Moore Family Trust. I'm afraid the matter is urgent." She found Lysander in the greenhouse, sleeves rolled, pricking lettuce seedlings into biodegradable pots for the staff canteen. The caller's name drained the color from his face. He wiped soil from his fingers, took the receiver, and walked to the far end of the vestibule. Although Evangeline could hear only fragments, diverted disbursements, probate exhibits, statute of limitations, the tension radiating from him felt like static before a lightning strike. When he hung up, he stared out at the river a full minute before speaking. "My grandfather's estate is being audited," he said at last, voice flat. The trustee overseeing the charitable arm apparently siphoned funds to private shell companies. If the allegations stand, the entire trust could be frozen. His gaze tracked a pair of geese arrowing south. Half of Helix's compassionate use programs run on that capital bridge. The fallout could stall them for years. Evangeline set down her pipette tray. "Is there a defense?" "There might be, if I can prove my mother amended the trust instructions before she died. She kept a signed addendum, but I never found it after the funeral." He rubbed his temples. "She had a habit of storing important papers in improbable places, bread boxes, seed catalogs, once inside a piano bench." "Could it be here?" Evangeline asked. "She stored her personal journals in the old wine cellar. I've avoided that room since she passed." He offered a brittle smile. "Turns out avoidance isn't a great archival strategy." They descended narrow stone stairs that smelled of damp slate and tannin. The cellar, half carved into bedrock, housed more dust than wine now. At the back, wooden crates towered like neglected reliquaries. Lysander pulled the cord on a single bulb, its yellow cone revealed cobwebbed bottles and, tucked behind them, a cedar chest the size of a hope chest. For a moment he just stood there, breath uneven. Evangeline brushed his sleeve. "We open it together." The chest's hinges groaned. Inside lay leather-bound notebooks stacked in chronological order, his mother's meticulous handwriting visible through translucent onion skin pages. Underneath them, wrapped in waxed linen, rested a document tube sealed with crimson ribbon. Lysander untied the ribbon with the delicacy of unspooling DNA. The tube released a sheaf of signed directives dated 6 weeks before his mother's stroke, new oversight clauses, whistleblower protections, and a requirement that no single trustee could authorize disbursements without a cosign from an independent medical ethicist. His shoulders sagged, relief colliding with regret. "She tried to guard the vault herself," he whispered. "I should have looked sooner." Evangeline thumbed one of the journal spines. Each bore a botanical engraving on its cover: Trillium, Lady Slipper, Ghost Pipe. She realized his obsession with rare flora wasn't merely aesthetic, it was an inheritance. She replaced the volume gently. Regret is a hydrocarbon, it burns but won't power anything forward. Let's get these scanned and notarized before the trustee lawyers wake up. They spent the afternoon digitizing every page. Lysander, usually lightning fast at the keyboard, paused frequently, eyes catching on margins where his mother had doodled plant cross-sections or scribbled grocery lists next to existential questions. Once he laughed softly and turned the screen so Evangeline could read, "Note to self, remind Lysander that creative failure is still progress. Also buy more mint tea." The juxtaposition was so utterly maternal Evangeline felt her chest tighten. By 6, the documents were encrypted, watermarked, and dispatched via secure courier to Kincaid. Lysander closed the laptop and pressed fingertips to his eyelids. Evangeline made tea, terrible bagged Earl Grey, the only variety in the pantry, and handed him a mug. He tasted, grimaced, but drank. Lowell appeared with a tray of sandwiches no one had requested. The caretaker's eyes flicked to the laptop, then to the half-emptied tea box. With the intuition of long service, he said, "Garden mint is still growing, sir. I can steep a better pot." Lysander's reply wavered between gratitude and something raw. Lowell withdrew before either emotion crystallized. Later, when twilight bruised the sky, Evangeline ventured out to the gazebo where Lysander stood overlooking the river again. He didn't turn as she approached, but he spoke. "The trustee will capitulate once he sees the addendum. It should clear by February. That rescues the compassionate use wing," she said. "And parts of me I'd walled off." He exhaled, visible in the cool air. "Thank you for pulling me into that cellar." I nudged. "You opted for the descent." She rested forearms on the railing. "Descent's where data live, anyway." A barge horn moaned downstream. He traced its fading wake with a fingertip on the rail, then asked, "What were your parents like?" The question was gentle, almost shy. She hesitated, no one at Helix had ever asked. "My dad welded pipelines from Canada to Texas. Gone months at a stretch. Mom ran a diner off I-40. When business was slow, she let me mix milkshakes to learn ratios." Evangeline smiled at the memory. She believed a well-balanced milkshake could repair just about any heartbreak. "So that's your origin story." Lysander looked over, river light glinting in his eyes. "Ratios and repair. And yours is plants and impossible patents." The air between them felt charged, neither contractual nor clinical. She could see how exhaustion softened his jaw, how relief made his shoulders slope differently, how the faint freckle near his eye darkened at dusk. He cleared his throat. "The gala is still 5 days away, but my mother would insist on toasting small victories." He produced 2 crystal tumblers and a bottle of elderflower tonic from a nearby cooler, pouring while she laughed at the improbability. They clinked glasses. Elderflower fizzed sharp against her tongue. "To amended trusts," she said. "To reclaimed archives," he answered, and the glasses touched again, softer. She realized the moment marked their first toast without cameras. When darkness fully settled, they walked back toward the house side by side, neither leading, neither following. At the library door she paused. "I think your mother would like you back in there tonight," she said. He glanced toward the piano. "Only if you bring the milkshake ratios." She promised to supply them, though she warned her culinary skill capped at chocolate vanilla swirl. He countered that spectrophotometry proved chocolate absorbed sadness at a statistically significant rate. The exchange tilted from banter into something like an inside joke, a stone set where a foundation might later arise. Hours later, lying awake, Evangeline replayed the image of him in the cellar, shoulders shaking as he unrolled his mother's signature. The tabloids would never print that photograph, but it was the one she catalogued, index-filed, and placed beside the violet's fluorescence, evidence that the variable she'd entered into this contract with was more intricate, more human, than any headline could summarize. Beyond the window a late cicada rasped, season out of time yet alive anyway, refusing to cede its voice to cold. She understood the impulse. The week that carried them toward the Helix Foundation Gala unfolded like a time-lapse of blooming and withering nerves. By Tuesday Evangeline could walk the length of the East Wing in her midnight blue gown without stepping on the hem. By Wednesday Lysander could knot his own bowtie, 3 tries, but still, without Lowell's discreet assistance. They treated the whole exercise like an extended bench protocol, repeat until variance fell below embarrassment. Yet outside the estate, tension accumulated. Financial blogs hinted that Helix's IPO roadshow would now open with a wedding reel. Social tabloids dredged up Evangeline's dissertation photo and captioned it from small-town statistician to billion-dollar bride. She set blocking filters, but pings kept breaching her phone like experimental contaminants. When she arrived at breakfast Thursday, hair still damp, earbuds blaring white noise, Lysander slid a folded printout across the table. It was the latest party seating chart, 1,200 donors, policymakers, and journalists mapped to tables like amino acids in a protein. "You and I are table 1, he said, tapping the nucleus of the diagram. 5 journalists, 3 senators, the astronaut you liked, and the CEO of Solis Pharma, the one we need for adjuvant licensing." Evangeline tapped her mug against the paper, as if stress could be dissolved by caffeine. "They'll all want a live-action fairy tale." "Let them want it," Lysander answered. "We'll give them data," and a polite smile. She managed half a smile. "Polite. But not docile." "Docile is above my pay grade," he said, and the full smile widened, equal parts reassurance and admission that he, too, dreaded the spotlight. The afternoon before the gala, a courier delivered Evangeline's final safety checks, fresh immunogenicity tables from the pediatric cohort. The numbers gleamed, seroconversion at 94% with 0 severe adverse events. She printed the graphs on heavy cardstock and carried them down to the Riverside Pavilion where Lysander rehearsed a 2-minute toast. "You're rewriting the slide deck," he guessed when she arrived holding papers. She shook her head. "I'm rewriting the narrative." She laid the graphs across the wooden railing so the late sun backlit them like stained glass. "If anyone asks why we rushed our vows, I'm going to say, because the science couldn't wait." He studied the curves, saw the angle where one line, representing autoantibody suppression, dipped like a swallow in full dive. Then he took the papers, slipped them into his jacket pocket. "I want those on our table tomorrow night. Data as centerpiece," she mused. "Florists will riot. Numbers don't wilt," he said, and she laughed, partly from exhaustion, partly from the sweet, improbable certainty that she wouldn't be alone on that ballroom floor. On the morning of the gala, Lowell awoke the house before dawn with a discreet knock, a delivery from Marshall Kincaid's office. The trustee under investigation had folded, signed settlement papers, and wired restitution. The Moore family trust was officially solvent again. Lysander and Evangeline stared at the notarized documents in the breakfast nook, matching looks of disbelief. "It's over," Lysander murmured, tracing the embossed seal. "Every compassionate use trial resumes Monday." Evangeline exhaled a breath she hadn't known she was holding for years. "Then tonight isn't PR," she said. "It's a victory lap." He poured coffee into a glass pitcher instead of a carafe, he was too wired to notice, and burned his fingers. She dragged him to the sink, ran cool water while he grimaced, and for 2 quiet minutes the world outside headlines and trust funds ceased to exist. "Thank you," he managed when the sting faded. "For what?" "For the nudge, the descent, the spectrophotometer on heartbreak." He turned off the tap, eyes darker than coffee. "I doubt I'll articulate it correctly in front of 1,200 people." "Articulate it to me," she said. He reached into his pocket, produced the violet he'd cut that morning, Viola nephrophila, petals still shimmering with dawn condensation. "Statistical beauty curve," he said, placing the stem behind her ear. P-value, unavoidable. The quiet that followed tasted like the cusp of something irreversible. She touched the pedal, nodded once, and the spell broke. Time to dress, to confront the hydra of cameras. The ballroom of the Metropolitan Biotechnology Center felt engineered for vertigo, 1,000 filigreed lights, a dais tall as a judge's bench, and video screens looping b-roll of Helix's lab successes. Near the entrance, Lysander and Evangeline paused for their promised 30-second photo call. He offered his arm, she took it, both remembering Lowell's drill: breathe, shoulders square, find one camera, hold the gaze, move. Flash guns cracked, their combined silhouettes flashed onto a jumbotron, then vanished as quickly as a phosphene behind the eye. Inside, they navigated a gauntlet of minor luminaries. A state senator congratulated them on turning scandal into synergy. A venture capitalist suggested licensing their love story for a streaming docudrama. Evangeline answered with a polite half-tilt of her head while Lysander clipped responses down to monosyllables. Finally they reached Table 1 where the astronaut, Commander Willa Knox, rose to pull out Evangeline's chair. "Nice to meet a fellow Oklahoman making the impossible look standard," she said, rogue grin orbiting her features like a small moon. Dinner advanced, microcourse after microcourse, each announced by servers who drifted away before Lysander could decline wine refills. Evangeline laid the immunogenicity graphs on the tablecloth between the bread plates. Solis Pharma's CEO, a severe woman with Arctic white hair, leaned forward as if scented by data. By dessert, dark chocolate luster dusted with gold leaf, Evangeline and the CEO were trading antibody subclass ratios. Lysander watched the exchange with frank admiration until a Boston Herald journalist cut in, microphone flashing. "Dr. Moore," she said. "There are rumors your whirlwind marriage is a smokescreen to distract from Helix's environmental violations in Fayette County. Care to comment?" Across the table, senators leaned in for blood. Lysander opened his mouth, then stopped. Evangeline recognized that fraction-second stall. It was the same hesitation she'd seen in the cellar before grief overtook intellect. She pressed her knee against his under the linen and turned to the reporter herself. "Helix's Fayette site was audited last quarter," she said, voice steady. 0 OSHA citations, 1 minor EPA infraction for runoff acidity, mitigated within 17 days. But you're asking about personal motives, not soil pH. So here's the motive. She picked up the immunogenicity graph, angled it toward the camera. "This vaccine will prevent a decade of childhood immunosuppressants. We fast-tracked our marriage paperwork because unfounded scandal threatened to stall the trial, and we chose patience over gossip." Next question. Silence blossomed, even the senator's fork stalled midair. The reporter lowered her mic an inch. Respect or recalibration, Evangeline didn't care. Solis Pharma's CEO tapped 2 lacquered nails on the graph. "I'd like copies," she said. Commander Knox shouldered in, grinning. "Same here. Data viscosity is what glues us to the stars." The tension cracked. Lysander exhaled, the faint tremor in his wineglass stilled. He squeezed Evangeline's hand beneath the tablecloth, a squeeze not of grateful CEO to damage control specialist, but of something simpler: "I see you." When dessert plates were cleared, the MC announced Lysander's toast. He rose, jacket button swallowing a hard swallow. The ballroom hushed. 5 days ago, he began, I found documents my mother wrote to protect the integrity of our family trust. Integrity she believed mattered more than profit. The person who convinced me to search is the person beside me now. He gestured to Evangeline, camera lights feathered across her gown. Tonight isn't our story, though. It belongs to children whose immune systems are learning, at this very hour, not to attack themselves. It belongs to every scientist who loses sleep arguing with a stubborn variance until dawn. And it belongs to my mother, who taught me that scientific rigor and human tenderness are not opposites. He lifted his glass. To rigor and tenderness, may we never sacrifice one for the other. Glasses clinked, 100 phone screens rose to capture the moment. The Jumbotron flashed their faces again, this time with the violet visible behind Evangeline's ear, a small defiance against black tie homogeneity. Lysander sat, eyes bright, apology or pride she couldn't tell. She leaned toward him, whispering, "Your mother would have annotated that toast." "With grocery lists," he murmured, and she laughed, tension draining like tide. The band struck up a swing standard, and pairs migrated to the dance floor. Lysander offered his hand. She hesitated. Choreographed intimacy had never been the contract, only strategic appearances. But then she remembered the piano duet on the stormy night, how 4 minutes of shared melody had felt like full oxygen. She placed her hand in his. Under chandelier halos they moved with awkward caution at first, both counting beats like lab timers. Halfway through the song, Lysander surprised her by whispering a joke about the senator's tie clip resembling a CRISPR-Cas9 complex. She snorted, lost the rhythm, and he steadied her waist, laughing too. The laugh rippled outward, not as spectacle but as artifact of sincerity that no flashbulb could counterfeit. Around them cameras snapped, yet it felt oddly private, a dance floor shrunk to the span of 2 respirations. When they finally stepped away, breathless, the Solis Pharma CEO intercepted them. "Your data," she said to Evangeline, "convince more eloquently than any marketing deck. Our board meets Tuesday. Let's discuss adjuvant supply." She pressed a card into Evangeline's palm, silver emboss, no title, weighty as a key. Minutes later, Lowell materialized with their coats. He had traveled to the city unasked, guardian ghost of exits. They slipped out through a service corridor slick with catering trays and descended to the street where an ordinary sedan waited. Lysander loosened his tie. Evangeline kicked off her heels inside the car, laughing at how cartoonishly tall he looked beside her stocking feet. "You hijacked a ballroom," he said during the glide uptown. "I borrowed it for peer review," she corrected. He traced the violet still pinned in her hair. Petals were wilting, spectral shimmer gone, but beauty lingered in exhaustion's echo. "We still have 3 months left in the contract," he said. "But certain variables seem convergent." "Convergence requires replication," she reminded him, leaning closer. "Then we replicate." His hand found hers on the seat. No cameras, no clauses, only the slow, certain clasp of fingers interlacing as the city blurred by like time-lapse thunderheads. In the tinted glass she caught their reflection, no longer a scandal to avert or a fairy tale to sell, just 2 investigators of a living hypothesis neither wholly understood, yet both were suddenly, indelibly, invested in proving true. The Gala's afterglow lasted exactly 48 hours, until Monday dawn delivered the mundane tyranny of inboxes. Evangeline woke in her suite to a symphony of pings, lab technicians requesting reagent codes, a Boston blogger asking for 5 marriage tips from a data-driven bride, and, buried beneath the noise, a flagged message from the FDA's Biologics Division. Subject line, conditional query, lot release documentation, urgent. She ignored the caffeine yearning in her bloodstream and opened the attachment. Someone on the review team had noticed an inconsistency in the batch numbering of the pediatric trial vials. A clerical blip, probably, 2 digits transposed on shipment labels, but enough to halt final lot release until Helix supplied audited chain of custody logs. Without those logs, the children in Cohort C would miss their booster window, miss the window, and the entire 6-month efficacy metric would collapse like an underfed cell culture. She was out of bed and halfway across the corridor before she registered that she was still in leggings and an oversized t-shirt. Lysander's door was ajar. He sat at his desk, tie already looped but untied, staring at the same email on a large curved monitor. His fingers drummed a Morse code rhythm on the desk, stress he rarely showed. "I've alerted quality systems," he said without looking up. "But the audit trail is scattered across 3 warehouses and a subcontractor in St. Louis that just burned down its main server room. Literally. Electrical fire last night." Evangeline perched on the desk edge, scanning the email again. "We can rebuild from paper manifests. Paper manifests live in Fayette County, 30 minutes from that server room." He exhaled through his nose. The regulators gave us a 72-hour clock. After that, they pulled a release authorization. She let the numbers wash over her: 72 hours, 3 facilities, at least 12 pallets of shipment logs. The problem wasn't science, it was logistics. Ironically, the one arena where Helix, a biotech darling with cloud-based everything, had grown lazy. She considered options. Charter a jet to St. Louis? Too slow. Beg the FDA for an extension? They'd smell desperation. What if we supply an independent verification method, she said, brain already sketching decision trees. Mass spec the residual stabilizer in random vials. Each lot had a unique isotopic ratio. We can fingerprint them. Lysander looked up, the drumbeat in his fingers halting. We'd need instrument time and an external lab to avoid accusations of self-grading. I know a place. She did, Columbia's isotope facility, where a former TA now ran night shifts. But it was in Manhattan, and the vials were in Jersey under federal seal. We'll have to convince the FDA to release a sample set. That's asking the wolf to borrow the sheep. Better than letting the wolf burn the barn, she countered. By 8 a.m. they had Lowell at the wheel of the Range Rover, barreling toward the New Jersey storage hub. Evangeline rode shotgun with 2 laptops open, composing a protocol addendum to justify emergency isotopic verification. Lysander, in the back seat, toggled between phone calls, Columbia lab director, then their FDA liaison, then the legal team, threading a needle of urgency without tipping into panic. At the warehouse, they signed a blizzard of access forms. A federal inspector named Givens eyed their isotopic ratio proposal with skepticism but allowed 6 vials, 2 from each suspect lot, to be escorted under chain of custody seals to Columbia, provided a regulator accompanied them. Givens himself volunteered, perhaps curious to see if the genius CEO and his headline bride could actually walk their talk. Traffic into the city was apocalyptic. Lysander commandeered the time to brief Givens on the chemical signature each lot should show, drawing on the back of an old grant abstract. Evangeline emailed the schematic to Columbia so technicians could pre-calibrate. She felt an odd calm, the crisis had clarified everything. Upper East Side penthouses and Gala flashbulbs were abstractions, this, fragile vials cradled in a pelican case, a child's immune trajectory depending on isotopic spikes, this was the real marriage. Columbia's isotope facility smelled of solvent and old radiology textbooks. Evangeline's former TA, now Dr. Satish Patel, had prepped 3 mass spectrometers in parallel. Givens broke the seals himself, initialed chain of custody forms, and stepped back with arms crossed. The first run took 20 minutes, the chromatogram painted across the monitor like sunrise. Unique peaks gleamed at M/Z ratios exactly where Evangeline's protocol predicted. Lot A matched reference file A delta. She exhaled only when the second vial confirmed. Lot B took longer, the run glitched, a syringe clog, but at 14:37 the signature bloom appeared. By dusk, all 6 vials were matched, producing a statistical fingerprint that rendered handwritten manifests obsolete. Givens faxed preliminary approval to the FDA before they even packed up the machines. He turned to Lysander, grudging respect in the angle of his chin. I've seldom seen a company swap horses mid-race without a single misstep, he said. You two make a hell of a team. Lysander's eyes flicked to Evangeline. Team is the correct ranking, he said, and she felt the word settle like a badge. They exited onto Amsterdam Avenue under a bruised peach sky. Sirens wailed somewhere east, taxis honked, the city's arterial roar enveloped them. For the first time in 30 hours she noticed her knees shaking. Adrenaline crash was imminent. Dinner, Lysander declared, flagging a cab. You need fuel to survive the come-down. They ended up at an unassuming pierogi bar near the 116th Street station, formica tables, fluorescent lights, the kind of place her grad cohort used for cheap carbs before finals. Over butter-glossed dumplings and pickled beets, the day's terror transmuted into retrospective awe. Lysander recounted Gibbons's incredulous face when the third chromatogram printed. She mimicked his stiff inspector posture until Lysander laughed so hard he nearly inhaled sour cream. Somewhere between the second plate of pierogi and the free shot of plum vodka the owner insisted they sample, the conversation drifted beyond crisis logistics. "My mother would have liked you," Lysander said, rolling the vodka glass between his palms. "She believed competence was the highest form of charm." Evangeline blushed, surprising herself. "And what do you believe?" "I'm adjusting my model." He set the glass down, eyes steady on hers. "Competence plus courage equals gravitational pull." The plum vodka warmed her throat, but it was the look that heated her chest. She toyed with her napkin. "My dad would say courage is just fear that has said its prayers." "Then your dad and my mother would have argued theology over mint tea," he mused. A comfortable hush settled. The edge between contract and choice blurred under sodium streetlights slanting through the window. She checked her watch, 22:03. The 72-hour clock still ticked, but the worst was behind them. When they finally stood to leave, Lysander pulled his wallet, only to discover Lowell had replaced his credit cards with a note, "House account settled. Come home." They laughed, signed the receipt anyway, and stepped into night air smelling of rain on hot pavement. In the cab back to Hudson, exhaustion pressed Evangeline's head to the seat. Halfway across the bridge she dozed. She woke to Lysander's jacket tucked around her shoulders, his hand a quiet weight over hers. For once, no cameras recorded the gesture, no contract clause prescribed it. It was empirical, a single data point logged only in her private ledger. The estate lay dark except for lamplight in the greenhouse. Automatic timers, she thought, until she saw the silhouette, Lowell, tending seedlings even at midnight. Guardians rarely sleep. At her suite door Lysander paused. Regulator clearance should arrive by morning. He hesitated. "There's champagne in the library. To celebrate surviving our first joint catastrophe." "Second," she corrected. The parking lot headline was the first. He chuckled. "True. This one we chose to face." She flashed a weary smile, leaning against the doorframe. "I choose the champagne, but tomorrow. Tonight, my variance demands sleep." Sleep is an acceptable endpoint. His eyes lingered, not invasive, simply present. "Night, Dr. Pike." "Night, Dr. Moore." Inside, she folded his jacket, breathing the faint mix of elderflower tonic and greenhouse loam. She placed it over the desk chair, an unfinished gesture, maybe a placeholder. The house creaked like an aging ship, but instead of echoing loneliness, the sound felt like timbers settling into seaworthy alignment. She crawled into bed fully clothed, phone buzzing once with a message from Satish, FDA liaison called, impressed. "Buy you ramen next time." She typed back a thumbs up, then opened her private journal app. "Day 92 of contract marriage," she wrote. "Hypothesis amendment, shared crises accelerate experimental bonding." She hesitated, then added one word, replicating, and saved the entry. Somewhere beyond sleep, she sensed the greenhouse vent sighing, cycling air across new leaves. The violet's parent plants would bloom again soon. When they did, she would record the wavelengths and, perhaps, give them a new notation, VNPL, Viola nephrophila pikemore, subspecies resilience, morning arrived dressed in triumph, an email timestamp 6/11 from FDA Biologics, subject line, lot release authorization, no deficiencies. Evangeline read it twice before disbelief released its grip, then padded down the corridor waving her phone like a torch. Lysander, already in the kitchen crushing cardamom pods for coffee, registered the news with a silent exhale that left his shoulders 3 inches lower. He set 2 mugs on the table, then inked a giant check mark on the whiteboard where they tracked critical milestones. Under the mark he wrote 94% in block letters, the seroconversion rate that would now stand undisputed. They allowed themselves 10 minutes of victory stupor, coffee sipped standing up, no agenda, only the shared recognition that hundreds of children would stay on schedule because they'd refused to yield to bureaucracy. Then the day tugged them back into motion. Evangeline had a data-lock meeting with her trial statisticians. Lysander needed to brief the board before someone leaked the near-miss to investors. They agreed to reconvene for dinner, a promise that felt as deliberate as any calendar invite. During her video call, Evangeline noticed something odd in the Zoom window. Her colleagues kept shooting glances at one another, smiles tugging the corners of their mouths. Finally, Dr. Chen unmuted. "Rumor says congratulations are in order, not for the FDA win." Evangeline's stomach dipped until Chen added, "Someone spotted a certain billionaire in a midtown jewelry boutique yesterday afternoon. Should we expect a ring upgrade?" Evangeline stalled, cheeks heating. She knew exactly where Lysander had been yesterday at 4, negotiating spectrometer time, but jewelry? She promised to pass along any official announcements and steered the meeting back to confidence intervals, yet even as she spoke she felt a hum of curiosity under her ribs. The board debrief ran long. Lysander emerged at 5, tie askew, temper held in check only by exhaustion. Some directors wanted an internal post-mortem, others wanted someone fired. But the settlement papers from the trust scandal had arrived that morning too, and Lysander leveraged the good press. Compassionate use program saved, FDA crisis averted, IPO timeline intact. Eventually even the most hawkish director conceded that the optics were net positive. He found Evangeline later in the greenhouse, hands buried in potting mix as she transplanted a tray of violet seedlings, offspring of the bloom he'd tucked behind her ear at the gala. "Board survived," he said. "They want routine updates instead of resignations." He paused. "Also, I may have interviewed a jewelry designer." Her trowel froze mid-air. "Interviewed?" "I know nothing about stones," he admitted. "Last time I ordered gemstones they were for protein crystal seeding. I thought professional guidance wise." Heat crept up her neck, equal parts delight and alarm. "The contract still has 90 days. I'm aware." He lifted a seedling, setting it gently into a new pocket of soil. "But the contract is proving a poor predictor of reality. I'd like contingency plans in place." "Contingency plans?" she echoed, heart trip hammering. "Such as a ring that isn't titanium labware." His smile flickered, half sheepish, half resolute. "No pressure." She pressed soil around the seedling, grounding herself. "Let's log more data before we pre-order deliverables." "Agreed," he said, no disappointment evident. "Research must replicate." Dinner that night was Lowell's doing, grilled steelhead trout, rosemary potatoes, and a citrus salad bright enough to shock winter. The caretaker served wine, then vanished, claiming gutters to inspect. Halfway through the meal, rain began drumming the glass roof of the adjoining conservatory. Thunder stitched the sky. Conversation meandered, Oklahoma diner stories, Lysander's brief stint as a jazz club janitor in college, the absurdity of carrying $1 million biologics in a $30 cooler. Each anecdote spun filament across the table until the silences felt woven, not empty. After dishes were washed, a chore they now took turns claiming, they migrated to the library. The storm's cadence begged for music, but instead of the piano, Lysander retrieved one of his mother's notebooks, the one with ghost pipe etched on the cover. "There's a passage you should read," he said, flipping pages. He found it, handed the book across. In neat cursive, his mother had written, "Discovery isn't a lightning strike, it's a series of tiny sparks that, when viewed together, illuminate direction. The danger is mistaking early sparks for the whole fire, or worse, fearing the burn and never striking at all." Evangeline traced the ink with her thumb. She was talking about plants. "About life," he answered. Lightning lanced the sky, illuminating dust motes like bioluminescent plankton. He added, quiet but unwavering, "I'm not mistaking sparks for fires, I'm recognizing a sustained combustion." Her pulse thudded. She closed the notebook softly. "If we rewrite the contract into something real, the media cycle will start again. Then we'll starve that hydra by living offline. He gestured around the room. Shelves of knowledge, terrible coffee, greenhouse insomnia. They can film outer shells, they'll never capture the marrow. Thunder cracked so close the windows rattled. Instinctively she flinched, his hand covered hers on the cover of the notebook, steadying. She met his gaze and saw a reflection of her own trepidation and wanting. Wordlessly they stood, moved to the conservatory where rain hammered glass panels until it poured down in sheets. Vines trembled in the onslaught, and the air smelled of petrichor and damp soil. He brushed rain-chilled knuckles along her cheek. We'll proceed at your pace. She swallowed. My pace just accelerated. And she kissed him, tentative first, then sure, as stormlight strobed behind her eyelids. His arms circled her, careful, reverent, but the kiss deepened, gathering months of disciplined restraint until data points blurred into something indivisible. When they finally parted, the rain had softened to drizzle. Her lips tingled, his breathing shivered against her forehead. That, he said, voice raw, is significant. P less than 0.0001, she agreed. They laughed, a shaky, shared exhale. He led her back to the library where they drafted an addendum, not legal this time, but handwritten on plain paper. Hypothesis: two scientists can transform contractual alliance into authentic partnership without sacrificing professional rigor. Protocol: continue shared living arrangement, remove guest suite stipulation, maintain separate labs, joint decision-making. Evaluation metric: well-being indices, sleep hours, spontaneous laughter, subjective sense of belonging. They signed initials, dated the page, and pinned it on the notice board beside the violet spectral data. No witnesses, no lawyers, just ink and resolve. Later, she lay awake in her room, still her room, autonomy intact, listening to the greenhouse vents hum. She imagined their immunology paper's acknowledgement section, special thanks to thunderstorms for unmasking statistical significance. She rolled over to her phone, opened her journal. Day 99 of former contract, she typed. Control arm replaced by choice. Before sleep captured her, she added a footnote, replication underway. Across the hall Lysander stood at the library desk, turning the ghostpipe notebook to a blank page. He wrote a single sentence in the margin, his mother's handwriting echoing in his mind: the fire is kindled, guard it with curiosity and kindness. Then he closed the book, extinguished the lamp, and let the dark hold both memory and the future, secure in the knowledge that some variables, once bonded, were meant to remain irreversibly linked. Snow arrived early, sifting over the Hudson in mid-November like powdered bone meal, the sort botanists use to coax stubborn orchids. Evangeline watched it from the library window, knees tucked to her chest on the window seat that had become her unofficial office. 99 days had stretched into 132, every one of them recorded in her hidden journal. The first time Lysander let Lowell take a weekend off and cook disastrous lasagna, the morning she found him asleep in the greenhouse, laptop balanced on his chest and a scroll of peptide models blinking, compile error. The night she admitted aloud that the trial's success scared her more than failure because success meant scaling, and scaling meant the data would no longer be hers alone to shepherd. Now the trial was officially a success. The interim analysis, signed off by the Independent Review Board, put efficacy at 93.6% across all pediatric age bands. Helix's IPO roadshow, once threatened by scandal, had closed oversubscribed. Compassionate use shipments were queued in cryogenic trucks branded with a new violet owl crest that design interns claimed was, accidentally, inspired by her field notes. Investor fever should have made Lysander giddy. Instead it left him subdued, cautious, as if every fresh billion on the valuation meter were a high-voltage line he dared not touch without thick gloves. His caution surfaced again that morning when he appeared in the library doorway, hair damp from the shower, tieless but wearing the charcoal suit that meant Manhattan. Kincaid scheduled signing at 3, he said. The trust settlement's final release. After that, the press expects us at the Foundation Auditorium for the milestone briefing. It will be brutal, she warned. They'll want the fairy tale postscript, baby countdown, reality show rights. We'll give them pharmacovigilance tables instead. But his eyes betrayed other calculations, and she thought again of Chen's boutique rumor. Before she could probe, her phone buzzed, a secure chat ping from Satish at Columbia, lab-grown diamond ready. Congrats, secret squirrel. Her pulse jumped, she pocketed the phone before Lysander saw. They drove into the city through flurries that faded to wet drizzle south of Yonkers. At Kincaid's office a notary witnessed their signatures on the final trust documents, gold seal still warm when Lysander slid the folder back across the mahogany table. 12 million redirected to helpline subsidies, as requested, Kincaid confirmed. Your mother's clauses stood unchallenged. Lysander nodded, gratitude and sorrow braided behind his composed expression. The Foundation Auditorium, 2 floors beneath Helix headquarters, smelled of fresh paint and stale camera batteries. 100 reporters filled tiered seating, LED screens looped footage of children in hospital playrooms receiving the trial vaccine. Evangeline, wired with apprehension, took her place beside Lysander behind a plexiglass podium. She could feel journalists zooming lenses onto her left hand, still ringless. Good, she thought savagely, let them wonder. The briefing began with a regulatory summary, then a pediatric immunologist explained B-cell memory curves. At last Lysander stepped forward. We built this platform for one purpose, to give children back the immune systems they deserved at birth, he said. Today we move from proof of concept to global manufacture. He acknowledged the trust release, the IPO partners, his late mother's insistence on stewardship. Then he did something unscripted, he gestured to Evangeline. She entered my life as a biostatistician, then as my biggest critic, then as the collaborator who refused to let red tape derail children's doses. He paused, scanning the sea of faces that smelled blood. Many of you ask whether our marriage is permanent or provisional. I can't answer in headlines. But I can offer data. He clicked the remote. The screen behind them flashed, a running graph labeled well-being indices, Moore Pike household. Days along the x-axis, indices, hours of sleep, spontaneous laughter count, subjective belonging, on the y-axis. A blue curve climbed steadily from day 1 to day 132. Murmurs rippled, someone laughed. Lysander continued, peer review this if you like. The trend is significant. Reporters fired off questions, but he held up a hand. For deeper metrics, I'll defer to Dr. Pike. He stepped aside, she swallowed panic and approached the mic. Data integrity requires transparency, she began. So here's mine. At 32 I assumed my life would orbit grant rejections and second-hand lab coats. Instead it orbits a hypothesis I never tested in graduate school, that 2 people can merge their intellectual property, minds, ethics, sleepless nights, and still preserve independent variables. She looked at Lysander. So far the confidence interval is narrowing in favor of permanence. We will let you know when the p-value crosses the proposal threshold. Reporters burst out laughing, even Gibbons, seated in the second row as FDA observer, grinned. The briefing ended. Flashbulbs detonated as they exited through a side corridor. Their car idled outside, driver door already open, but Lysander guided her past it toward a glass annex he claimed housed one final minor obligation. Security badges recognized their faces, doors unlocked into a studio lit by skylights. Workbenches lined the walls, metallurgy microscopes, diamond growth chambers humming quietly. In the center, under a plexiglass cloche, rested a ring. The stone was pale violet rather than clear, its facets catching skylight in lavender shards. Tiny inclusions glimmered like dew in early sun. Around it, a band of brushed platinum bore twin engravings, a ghost pipe on one side, an owl on the other. It's silicon nitride grown on a seed of your trial stabilizer molecule, Lysander said, almost apologetically. The color comes from trace europium, same dopant we used in the isotope run. Satish called it inadvisable, I called it interdisciplinary. He lifted the cloche. There's no contract addendum that fits this next part. Say no if it skews your trajectory. Her pulse thrummed in her ears like the centrifuges she'd lived beside for so long. She remembered long nights of skepticism, thunderstorm kisses, isotopes rescued from warehouses, violets blooming at dawn. She realized the road back to pre-contract solitude had vanished months ago. Run the metric, she whispered. His hand shook only slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger. The metal was cool, then warm, then indistinguishable from her own skin, as if it had always belonged there. Outside, snow resumed, heavier now, widening the skylight into diffused glow. For a suspended moment nothing existed but lit breath and two slowed heartbeats. Replication? He asked. Continuous, she confirmed, and kissed him, tasted cardamom and unshed relief. They left the studio at dusk. Journalists had long since dispersed, filing stories of breakthrough vaccines and enigmatic love graphs. No one witnessed them stepping into the quiet sedan, fingers linked, rings scattering violet stars onto the leather seat. No cameras captured Lowell standing at the estate gate holding 2 mugs of mint tea against the cold. That night they sat by the greenhouse heater beneath arching lamps, monitoring seedlings for frost stress, knees touching in companionable silence. Eventually Lysander cleared his throat. About the Hydra, he said. We'll still starve it, she replied. Just, together. He nodded, rested his head lightly against hers. Beyond the glass, snow buried the past season, promising dormancy before spring. Inside, a tray of violet sprouts shook off condensation and reached for artificial dawn, each stem a data point curving inexorably toward full bloom.